here's what to expect. So the blue line in this chart is what we call effective club speed before the training. So it's going to be an average of about 5 balls hit on TrackMan. The red number is about 5 balls hit on TrackMan after the training. What we'll see is a pattern of getting a jump in club speed, usually after the very first session, and then about a 6 to 8 week normalization phase where the before and after speeds will be a little bit different still, and then enter a plateau where they're more stable. On average, we're going to see players increase their swing speed by 5% permanently in about 6 to 8 weeks. Now, if you continue this training and continue to move through the protocols, we'll see a secondary jump, usually about 4 to 6 months into the training. It's a little smaller, about 3.5%, another 6 to 8 week normalization period, and then another plateau. We released another product back in January of this year called our Super Speed C Club. Now this uses something called counterweight training, where we're trying to really change the physics of the motion to get an overspeed training effect on just one part of the motion. In this case, we're trying to get it right with the hands and arms right around impact. So we're trying to increase release speed, increase hand and arm speed around impact. We do this with a club that's significantly counterweighted. It's actually about the same overall weight as your driver, but it has a huge counterweight behind the player's hands, which allows that club to just slingshot through the impact zone extremely quickly and give us an overspeed training effect right around impact with the hands and arms. Now, all of this stuff works because of something we call athletic ceiling. Now, this is going to be any human being's peak potential to create speed and power. Now, this is going to be a result of that player's genetics and all the different developmental training that they did when they were a kid. So once we're in our early 20s, we're not changing our athletic ceiling very much. So for our junior players, we're trying to build that highest, peak athletic ceiling we possibly can so that they have the opportunity to create, powerful elite athleticism later in life. However, for our players that are older than their 20s or, later in life, we still can see huge speed gains because most people, in fact, nearly 100% of players we've come in contact with don't function anywhere near their peak athletic potential. So that gives us a huge gain potential for players that are really not changing their body in any significant way. All they're doing is accessing speed that their body was already able to produce. So that's kind of the overview that I wanted to give everybody about our Super Speed Golf Training products. There's a ton more information available on our website at superspeedgolf.com. Feel free to ask us any questions. You can email us at info@superspeedgolf.com or at any of our social media handles, which are all at superspeedgolf. We also have a great certification program, which you can use for online MSR credits. That's available at superspeedcertified.com. It's 3 levels of classes, and they're all online. So from our team at Super Speed, we hope you have a great rest of your meeting and convention, and we look forward to seeing you soon.
Good morning and welcome to day 2 of our 2020 teaching symposium supported by Techno Gym, PXG, Iconic Golf, and Super Speed. We hope if you were able to tune in yesterday that you found the information that was provided to be extremely beneficial. And if you weren't able to tune in, we will be sharing that information at the conclusion of the program Wednesday afternoon. Today, our speaker comes to you live from Pennsylvania, John Bierkan, the PGA Director of Golf at Aronimink Golf Club. John is no stranger to South Florida. During the winter, John spends his time at Old Marsh Golf Club, and we're excited to have him live with us today. John, the floor is yours.
Hi, my name is John Bierkan. I'm the teaching professional at Aronimink Golf Club near Philadelphia in the summer and at Old Marsh Golf Club in Palm Beach Gardens in the winter. I want to thank the South Florida section and the Education Committee for asking me to share some of my thoughts and ideas. Obviously, it would have been great to do this in person and get to meet many of you and have some nice discussion, but obviously we're in a unique situation and we're going to make this the best we can. What I thought I would do is talk a little bit about some of the what I believe are the more important items to look for in the backswing and the downswing and how some of those correspond to one another. So to me, I want to give you some practical items that you can go use right away on the lesson tee. Those are the experiences I always enjoy when I go to education events. So we're going to look at a handful of tour players, and then we're going to look at some examples of lessons that I've given, and I'm going to share with you some of the items that I look for and how I guided my students to some improvement. So again, this is going to be a handful of what I would consider more important things to look for. It's not everything. You know, in our presentation certainly isn't enough time to dive into every component of the backswing and the downswing, but I think it is enough time to give you an example of some of the key items that I look for and use in my teaching day in and day out. And I hope that they will help to benefit you in your instruction as well. So I hope you enjoy. I look forward to the question and answer period following the video and having some nice interaction. So we'll see you in a little bit.
I thought it would be a great idea to start the presentation off by showing you two very unique golf swings, and particularly unique backswings that were highly successful on tour. On the left, we have Miller Barber. Miller Barber won 11 times on the PGA Tour, including being on 2 Ryder Cup teams. He had 24 victories on the senior tour, including 5 senior majors. Raymond Floyd on the right had 17 wins on the PGA Tour, including 4 major championships, and then had a really successful career on the senior tour as well, including 3 senior major championships. So the reason that I wanted to show you these was because although the backswings are unique and different, their downswings are highly similar. And I just think that they're a good example for some unique patterns that we might experience day in and day out on the lesson tee at the club. And so I want to give you some checkpoints that I look at often and look at closely, that help me with my teaching, and I think that they're going to help you in your instruction as well. And so if we look at Miller Barber on the left, you know, his arms and hands go in a little bit, the club head stays out. Obviously, there's not too much external rotation in that right shoulder, is there? And the left arm's a little low and across his chest. Gets very upright there at the top. But then in the downswing, all of a sudden, when he gets to this checkpoint of around left arm parallel in the downswing, this is going to be something you're going to hear me speak of several times. Is this going to be this theme of looking at the hand path in the downswing, and also this club shaft angle in the downswing pointing outside the golf ball. So at left arm parallel, we want to see the hand path be somewhere around the toe line, and most players are going to be a little bit outside the toe line with the shaft in a similar position to this. So this is where unique backswings can work just fine. And we see that in modern players too. We're going to look at that shortly. So let's look at Raymond Floyd. As he goes back, there's about left arm parallel to the ground in the backswing. Now with Raymond, what he does is his hands and arms stay very in front of him in the backswing. And even though that club is flat and the club head is way over here, way behind him, the reason that it works is because his hands and arms do stay in front of his body in the backswing. And then he has this lift, and then he comes back down, and the hand path comes through the same place. That club shaft is definitely pointing outside the golf ball, and his hands and arms remain in front of his body. And one of the other things that, and that's a big reason why these guys with unique backswings, why it works so well, because on the downswing, they keep their arms and hands in front of them. And with Raymond, even though the club's a mile behind him, his arms and hands always stay in front of him. And So then what happens on the downswing with both of these guys is even with those patterns, they both end up coming down with a very neutral swing direction. I mean, you can see how close to that plane line they both are, and Raymond comes a little bit under there, just a smidge. But again, camera angle can play a role by a couple degrees here or there. But nonetheless, look how neutral that is. And then they can just swing through. And Raymond had a nice low left exit. And so with the pattern of the arms and hands out, the club in a reasonably shallow position, they come right down that line with beautiful impact and a lot of ball control. And that's why they were so successful. We're going to see this pattern in other players, and I'm going to show you with some of my lessons how I used some of those checkpoints as a means to help some of my students improve. So let's continue. Okay, we have two more unique swings, modern players, Jim Furyk and Matt Wolf on the right. Both obviously can play world-class golf. And so it's always fun to use these as examples to see what we can learn from them and how we can apply that in our teaching. And I think we'll see some common denominators with some of the other players. So let's put Jim in motion here. So he goes in a little bit, then lifts up. Very high position at the top, like many of these players. And then when he comes down, when he gets to about that left arm parallel position again, and we look at where those hands are, he's on the toe line, maybe not out quite as much as some of the other players, but he does have that look. And here's one of those important pieces: the club shaft is pointed outside the golf ball. Now, one of the unique things with Jim is that when he comes down, his right arm is pinched behind his right hip or over his right pocket. But one of the things that he does so well, in my opinion, that allows him to be such a good ball striker is that from here, as he rotates his hips, that right arm stays pinched and glued to the hip, but his hand path exits left very quickly. So his arms and the club are both connected and synchronized with the rotation of the body. So he's really on plane through impact with a tremendous amount of club face control. Now with Matt, obviously he's got this little kickstart move, goes back, more of that Miller Barber look, maybe even more so. Look at that at the top. How about that? But what he does so well is in transition, he shallows the club in his hand path, right? We look at this. When he gets to about that left arm parallel to the ground position, here we go again with the hands out in front of him and the arms staying very much in front of his body. And that club shaft is pointing outside the golf ball. So you wonder why a lot of teachers nowadays like to have that club shaft shallow, because many world-class players have that. It's not something to do just because it's a fad. It's because if you look at most world-class players, they have a look like that, regardless of the style of their backswing. And so Matt also does a nice job of staying in flexion and having side bend, and that makes a lot of room for his arms and hands to stay under his body and have a pretty nice exit right there. So here's that pattern again. that I just see many world-class players have. And so, again, the simple takeaway from that is, even if we're on the lesson tee and we happen to see some of our students have some unique backswings, if they can hit some of these checkpoints, they're going to have a good chance to hit quality golf shots. Now, if the backswing is off and the down, and the downswing is off, you got to do some thinking and figure out how you're going to approach it. But man, if you can have your students have this kind of pattern, they're obviously going to hit it pretty nicely. Okay, so now that we've looked at a few examples of unique backswings that produced high quality downswings that produced excellent ball flight, let's look at a couple of my favorite, more traditional looking golf swings, more aesthetically pleasing golf swings in Adam Scott and Justin Thomas. And I want to look at a couple aspects of the backswing and the downswing. And I would say that generally speaking, these would be more examples of models that I would use when teaching several students. But again, when we see unique patterns like the other golfers we looked at, obviously we have to know when and where we're going to change anything, because we don't want to, obviously have a negative effect on players with unique backswings. So as we scroll Adam back, he definitely has more of a textbook straighter takeaway, so that as he swings back and gets the club parallel to the ground, we can see the hands and the club are out in front of his body, a little bit more outside that toe line. If we run Justin back, we're going to see a very similar pattern, okay, with the arms and hands in front, somewhere around the toe line or just outside the toe line. Then as we scroll them up, so that's a checkpoint that I definitely use in my teaching. I think, for many people that we see in mid to high handicappers, they're going to generally do better with more of this traditional or conventional look. Not always, but more often than not. I feel like that's the experience I've had as a teacher. They're going to tend to do better with a pattern that's similar to this. Now, as we go to left arm parallel, right here, and let's scroll Justin up to left arm parallel as well. Okay, so that's good, about right there. Now, what I like to look at is, okay, where are the hands? Where's the butt of the club? That's a reference point I use a lot, the butt of the club, and then where is the club shaft? So, as I like to say, these players, the hands and arms are staying in front of them, and the club shaft going back has more of a vertical angle. I jokingly will say to my students, more of a vertical-ish kind of position in the backswing. And this is what I've defined as the tipping point. And what I mean by that is, generally, in most cases, if the club goes back in more of a vertical nature, it's easier for the club to then flatten or shallow out a certain degree on the downswing. So if we were to actually put the club at a 90-degree angle, and then we were going to have the club tip over, either tip over this way or tip over or tip back that way, it's a lot easier for the club to tip back, especially more behind us in that flatter, more shallow angle. It's a lot easier when the club goes back with more of a vertical angle. And so with these two examples right here, I would call that more of a vertical angle. And so in the downswing, we're going to look in just a minute to see if in fact those angles get flatter. So that's a checkpoint I'll look at a lot to see what a golfer's doing. And also, I will try to teach that to help people actually come more from the inside versus having them take the club low into the inside, because in most cases I've seen the club then go up and over. So I like to teach this position to help people shallow the club and get the path of the club or the swing direction more from the inside. So the hands are more in front of the sternum and the chest at this point. The hand path is somewhere around that toe line, with the club shaft in a vertical nature, and with the arms and the arm structure in front of the body. And a little note here that you'll sometimes have to look for this with certain players. I look at where the elbows are. I want that right elbow to be above the left elbow. That generally helps your arm structure and helps the club shaft to have more of a vertical nature to it. So now as these guys continue back, Justin obviously gets a little bit more lift in there at the end, but when he comes back down, his hand path actually works outside his backswing hand path. And you'll see some good players do this. I really like it because I think that it keeps the arms and hands out in front of the body, and it is a nice way for some players to start to flatten or shallow the club, and we can see that with JT. Now, as Adam goes back and comes down, he has what I call a more constant hand path. I mean, he's fractionally inside where he went back, but you know, for all intents and purposes, I would call that pretty constant hand path. But what is the club starting to do? That club shaft is definitely starting to flatten out. So that's why I like to get players, even you know, some of my higher or mid handicap players, let's get the club more vertical. Let's create that tipping point where it goes vertical so it can tip back and shallow out. And then when these players come down, right? By the way, I almost forgot to mention here, which to me is really important in the backswing. So if the club has more of a vertical nature going back, if we draw a line down from where the butt of the club is, it's another reference point I use. I want to see the butt of the club point inside the golf ball on the backswing, and then on the downswing, that club is starting to point outside the golf ball. So that's another checkpoint that you can use. Okay, Adam's about at the golf ball, but usually you want to be at that golf ball or outside of it, not inside of it. It's another way to look at pretty much what we just talked about with the club going more vertical-ish to more shallow. Okay, but again, if we look at where those arms and hands are, they're in front of the body. That to me is a big deal. That's why I'm very comfortable seeing Justin's hand path out, okay, because it helps his arms to stay in front of the body, to keep the arms connected and synchronized with the rotation of the body. And again, as I said, it helps to flatten the club. Now, what you'll also notice is you can see how their hands are out in front of them. Their arms are not trapped. And they both have a good amount of flexion right here in the upper torso and the chest. So as they come down, those hands can exit low and left, okay? And the arms can stay synchronized with the rotation of the body. So we can see how they have this angle and that side bend, okay, with the arms and hands and the club staying very synchronized with the rotation of the body. That's a big reason why if your hand and arms stay in front of you in the downswing, they help to shallow the club. And if the arms and hands are more in front of you, it helps to produce a very neutral swing direction. And obviously a more neutral control ball flight, and then your arms and hands are synchronized with the rotation of the body. You can see how neutral Justin's swing direction is going to be because his arms and hands are out in front of him. So what I see with a lot of golfers is their arms and hands go low and in the backswing, and or they can be either way too far out in the downswing or way too far in and trapped and stuck behind them in the downswing. So these are some key pieces to both the backswing and the downswing. Now let's start to look at some examples of students that I see on the lesson tee. Here we have Michael, low single-digit handicapper. I might see him once a year for a lesson, every once in a while, twice a year. Obviously a good player. He came to me complaining about hitting overdraws or some hooks, and he had no idea what was going on. So I did make the mistake of not getting an after video. I just got so in tune with the lesson, but I do have the TrackMan data here. So let's go ahead and take a look at his patterns and see why he was in fact hitting this ball, curving the ball too much to the left. So we can see that in the backswing, he does go a little bit low and in. His hand path and arms do get a little deep to the inside, just barely across the line at the top. But when he starts down, his hand path does reroute a good amount out in front of him. But the club itself is just coming too much from the inside on the downswing. So all I did with Michael was take a shaft and just stick it in the ground, and I asked him to obviously keep the club in front of him going back and keep the club in front of him coming down. And I showed him this video and showed him what was going on, showed him the TrackMan data, and then we got right to work. And basically immediately the ball flight and the numbers on TrackMan changed, and we'll look at that in just a second. So I just stuck the shaft in the ground, just inside the club. I usually go about 2 club heads inside the shaft and match the angle of the club shaft. Now, when I put that stick there, he immediately stayed out in front of it going back and stayed out in front of it coming down. So this was actually a pretty easy lesson to teach, especially knowing that his hand path on the downswing naturally worked more out, and that he already shallowed the club a good amount. So he just needed an external cue there to help the takeaway and help the downswing to get the swing direction more neutral. So if we look at the initial 3 shots that I collected on TrackMan, you can see the swing direction was well into out for a 7-iron. That's a lot. Generally, my rule of thumb is I want the swing direction to be anywhere from 0 to maybe 1, 2, 3 degrees to the left, something like that, depending on the player. So when I see 6 and 8 into out, that's a problem. Here's the other issue is that, and he even commented on this, that he didn't feel like he was compressing the ball or hitting it solid. Well, guess what? When you have an attack angle of -1, okay, or 0 with this 8 degree into out, you're probably not going to really compress it. Okay. Look at the spin axis numbers as well, which just confirms why the ball was curving a lot to the left. So with him just staying in front of the shaft going back, you can see instantly, right, what started to happen with the swing direction numbers, right? I mean, they just got closer to 0 right away, and look at immediately. Now, this was a gear effect shot. You can see the spin axis is crazy there, right? And you don't see that too many. It's not common to see that kind of gearing on an iron, but it can happen from time to time. But look at what happens to the attack angle as the swing direction gets better. Okay, so, and we're going to see that. Here's another shot. You can see the club path now was not 8 degrees to the right. And the spin axis was reducing. So we neutralized that a lot. Look at all these numbers. And you could see the spin axis on most of these was better. There were a couple that were too far left, but for the most part, we drastically reduced that. And you can see even on the last few shots, I said to him, okay, I want you to really feel like you're going to hit a cut now with the stick still in the ground. And what happened was that swing direction went even more to the left, and then you can see the net effect on the club path got closer to 0. And that's why, depending on the player and what their patterns are, a swing direction of 2, 3, 4 degrees to the left with a 7-iron very well could produce a club path close to 0. So that was my strategy with Michael. It was actually a pretty simple lesson to give. The ball flew straighter. He compressed it. He hit it more solid. He hit it further. He understood what we were trying to do, and he felt great about the changes. So that was my strategy with Michael. And I would encourage you, if you see that kind of pattern in a student, this may be a good recipe for success. This is Jacob. Jacob was a really good high school player, and he's going to be playing college golf this fall. And in this particular lesson, this was all a downswing lesson, really kind of post-impact. So he was curving the ball a little too much to the left. He's got a good swing. He hits it nicely, but the ball was going just a little too much left. So here's the before on the left. Okay, pretty good backswing. You know, his hand path maybe goes in a little bit, but he's at a good position at the top. His hand path is coming down in front of him, right? I mean, that's a pretty darn good delivery position right there. As we come into impact and just post-impact, you can see he has a little roll in his wrists. And at this point right here, post-impact, we can see the butt of the club head, and the arms. They're visible to the camera right there, but yet his chest and torso are to the left of where his arms and hands are. So in my opinion, the arms and hands are not connected and synchronized with the rotation of the body. And so typically, especially for good players, if you see that outward release, you could generally expect the ball to be going left. And so that's the decision I made to get Jacob to hit the ball straighter. You can see here, this was kind of like a half, 3/4-ish swing. And what I told him was, as he's coming through, I just want him to let his hands and the arms exit more low and left. Feel like that left arm stays connected up at his armpit and at his pec and the top of his rib cage. So just keep that left arm connected. Let the hands and the club head just swing low and around to the left with the rotation of his body. And what I did was, I also told him, I said I want him to visualize a line off of his left heel or his left hip, and that when he comes through, when the club comes through post-impact parallel to the ground, that the butt of the club and the club shaft would be in line with that left hip or down with his left heel, versus in the before on the left, his hands and the club are in line with his toes. So basically it was just keep the arms connected and synchronized with the body and let things exit low and left, and immediately he just started hitting the ball a lot straighter. So this was purely a downswing lesson, and it was a simple one. Obviously, with a good player, when you tell them something like that, you show them, explain it to them and then they can do it quickly and the ball flight changes, then they buy into it. So that's the strategy I took with Jake. Overall downswing was good. Just post impact, he had an outward release with his arms disconnected to the body, and you can see the difference here. Here we have Janet. Janet is a very dedicated golfer. Janet typically shoots in the low 80s, although she recently had one of her best rounds. She shot 78. She's very athletic. She likes to work on her game. Her long-term history is the arms in the club swinging low into the inside with her arms really too low across her torso. And then she would lift up and come over and above the plane. And with her work over the last several years, she's inched her way to better. This lesson was a couple weeks ago now, and we had previously done a lesson probably 6 weeks before this where we had really improved the precision of her backswing. So this was definitely a better takeaway. As she continued, though, she still had her arms and hands too deep, in my opinion. Now, of course, this is always relative to the player, the quality of the player, and what they're trying to do. So this pattern, may be acceptable for certain players based on where they are in their golf career. But for Janet, who's now trying to get consistently into the 70s and knows her ball striking just needs to go to the next level, this, in my opinion, just isn't quite good enough now. She's done a lot of work over the years to make it better, but she comes over the plane, or her swing direction goes too far to the left, and then she hits pulls and pull cuts and just absolutely can't stand it. So she's willing to work on it and add more precision to her move. So we can see when she gets the left arm parallel, the hand path is not out on the toe line, it's getting deep. And then if we watch her hand path coming down, it then goes out when she's left arm parallel in the downswing. So it's definitely an outward hand path. That club shaft is well above the right forearm, and you can see how she's above the plane, or her swing direction's going to the left. She hits down and across, and you can see that left arm pull out, the chicken wing, which she can't stand. So she hits pulls and pull cuts. I mean, she does a good job of managing the face as good as she can. So she will hit some reasonably straight shots, but she hates hitting the pulls and the pull cuts. So the question is, okay, what are we going to do to now make this better and add more precision? And so my strategy with Janet, and I showed her and explained this to her, is that we want to have more of a straight back takeaway and then let the hands and arms work straighter up to stay more in front of her, to create the opportunity for the club to flatten out, to get the swing direction to work more in to out. And so we talked specifically about it. And so we wanted her to have the takeaway be much straighter back, which feels a little out to her. And again, not that this was bad on the left, but just not good enough for her. And you could see the difference as we go to left arm parallel on the right. And this was a deliberate swing, so you could see her lower body didn't turn quite as much on the right as it does on the left. And that's something obviously we'd keep an eye on. So if we look at where the hand path is now, and if we draw that line down from the butt of the club, obviously that's much more in front of her. And one of the other things that I look at is the position and the location of that right arm now. You can see how different that is, where the right arm is more in front of her That's a big deal in my opinion. And when that right arm is more in front and under, it's just going to be a lot easier for the club shaft to be shallower coming down, especially long term. It's going to create the opportunity for the club to flatten out, especially as she works on this. So we can see now as she comes down, she's deliberate here, doing a little pump drill. You could see the difference in the club shaft. Now, when she actually goes to hit, she is going to steepen this out a little bit, and that's just because she has a long-term pattern of that. And when we work on this next, we're going to add definitely more precision to that initial transition, but we'll get there when the time is right. She has enough to work on right now. So she did get a little steep, but even so, because the hand path is more out, what's the club starting to do? The club shaft is starting to flatten so that the swing path or the swing direction is going to work more into out, versus here where the club is well above the forearm and then the club head is out. Okay, so this is definitely a very refining piece, but again, I mean, every little bit matters, every degree matters. So now you can see where the delivery of the club is. It's coming down, and that's going to create the opportunity for the ball to start straighter as long as she now starts to square the face up, because she'd been swinging left. She had that little hold on move, that little chicken wing, where if the club's working slightly more into out, she's going to have to allow the forearms to have some natural rotation to square the face, because you're going to see this one, you know, she didn't quite square the face and it launched a little bit more to the right than ideal. Although we were working on, one of her little extra credit thoughts was to work on this move and try to start the ball to the right, so we create the opportunity for it to curve back to the left. So this was a nice difference. And again, it's a very specific thing, but when you're trying to take a player like Janet, you're trying to take a good player that might shoot in the low 80s and they're motivated to get to the mid 70s, right? You've got to do things. And for one of the pieces of her game that has to improve is the precision of her ball control. And you can see, though, even already there's a little less hold off or less chicken wing in that left arm as a result of the swing direction working a little bit more into out. So for Janet, it was all about this backswing move to go straight back and up to create the opportunity for the club to shallow and also get the swing direction of the club head to work more into out. This is Sharon. Sharon's a high handicap golfer who's dedicated herself to her game over the last 3 or 4 years. We pretty much started from scratch, making sure her grip was good, her setup was good, learning how to try to get the club on the ball more consistently, get the ball in the air, and then continue to work on things. So Sharon's been dedicated to her game. She takes anywhere between 2 and 4 lessons a month. So she is sometimes coming every week for a lesson. She's dedicated. She's puts a lot of focus and intent into her lessons. So she's a great student to work with. More recently, we've worked a lot on her backswing pivot to get her to turn the torso, the pelvis, and to be able to have that spine tilt a little bit away from the target as she gets to the top of the backswing. So lots of pivot work. Now, particularly, we've also tried to get her club to come more from the inside. Now, as a consequence of working on the backswing pivot, her arms and hands in the club do go a little too much low into the inside. And then she responds the way most golfers do, is if you go low to the inside, you're then going to lift up and come out and over the swing plane and hit down and across the ball, especially across to the left. So we've always had an awareness for trying to get her to swing more into out, but the pivot's been such a priority, I feel like she needs to have a good turn, and then we can come back and clean up her arm swing. And that's what we're doing. So in this most recent lesson, even though she is a high handicapper, I know I'm going to see her a lot. I know she likes to dig in and work on it. I wasn't hesitant about giving her some specifics to work on that are going to take a little bit of practice. So on the left, if we look at Sharon, I mean, obviously her setup looks good. Her grip is good. I'm a stickler for the grip. Her overall setup's good. We've got her pivot pretty solid now. But you can see as she goes back, okay, when she gets to left arm parallel, if we put that circle over the butt of the club like I do often, and then we draw the line down from the butt of the club, that's going to be somewhere much more over her heels. Where, as I've shown you previous, we want that somewhere more out over the toes. So now, as a result, you can see she goes in, up a little bit. She used to go up and over even more. That's improved. But this still is just too much at this point, right? I mean, early on, I could let that slide with her, but now to try to take her ball striking to the next level, we need to not be so far above it. And you can see coming down the club shaft is well above the right forearm, above the plane, and then goes down and across. Now, I will say, just as a side note here, typically what I like to do for the swing plane, I will go from hosel up to the base of the elbow plane. To me, that would be a really good way to do it. Or the other way that I like to do it is draw a line on the club shaft at impact. Oftentimes, those two match up very closely. So drawing the line specifically on the club shaft at address, I don't think is the best way to have a good perspective for a general swing plane reference line. Okay, so now after we worked on things, this was later in the lesson, I put this yellow stick on the ground. I'll do that a lot. That's generally close to the toe line. So as Sharon goes back, I told her when we get the club over the toe line and over that yellow stick, we want the shoulder, the elbow, the wrist, and the club shaft and the club head to essentially be in a straight line from her perspective standing over the golf ball. And then from there, as she continues to go back, we want her to deliberately set the wrists a little more and feel like her arms and hands are going up. So this is very similar to the lesson that I gave Janet. So we're going to go with the strategy here of having the arms and hands work more straight and up to create the opportunity for the club to then flatten and shallow out. And obviously we can see a big difference in Sharon's motion here. So for her, she's going to go straight back. When the club gets parallel to the ground, she should be on the toe line. She's going to set the wrists, allow the arms and hands to work more up and in front. Versus back. All right. So if the arms and hands work more up, the shaft is a little more vertical. That allows the club to tip back or fall back. And now the club shaft is coming down through her forearm versus well above the forearm or above the plane, however you want to look at it. So if you go back straighter and more vertical, it creates the opportunity for the club to shallow out and to get that swing direction more from the inside or less from the outside. So that is in my opinion, a really important thing, as we've looked at in some of those other world-class players. They do a good job of keeping the arms and hands in front, which creates the opportunity for the club to shallow out. Here's another good example. This is Billy Peel. I've worked with Billy for about 6 or 7 years now. The picture on the left was our very first lesson. That's at Quail Valley in Vero Beach. At the time, Billy had just graduated from Eastern Kentucky University, where he was a standout golfer, and he had just turned pro. He played the mini tours for about 2 winters and just decided it wasn't what he wanted to do. And so he got his amateur status back and moved back home, and lives in Maryland. And so Billy has now won back-to-back Maryland State Amateur Championships last summer, and then just a week or so ago, in the middle of August. So this is a good example of a guy is a good player and was a good player, but through cleaning up his technique, we've just made his ball striking so much more consistent, both in terms of direction and contact and distance, improving the distance. So this is what I started with when I first saw Billy Peel. And I want to guess this was the winter of either 2014, maybe 2015 at the latest. And you can see when he comes down, when he's at left arm parallel there, that's not a great position. And as he came into delivery position, that right arm, you can see how that right arm and elbow are really, really behind his shirt seam, and really that elbow is almost lined up with the Adidas logo on his pants. And then his swing direction would go in to out, and he would have this really high exit. He hit the ball, controlled it as well as he could with that pattern. And we've just been chipping away at this little by little by little. So I would say that his backswing was pretty good. You know, he was maybe in a little bit, that his left arm is in a little, his right arm is a little bit trapped behind him, also flat, which I don't love because that's not a good combo. And then when he comes down at left arm parallel, you can see the location of the butt of the club and where that club shaft is pointing. Okay, so that club is pointing well inside the golf ball. So he was inside the ball to inside the ball. So that club's pointing inside the golf ball, and then it's inside. His arms are really low and trapped behind him, so the shaft is vertical, and his arms and hands are trapped behind him there. So that doesn't quite meet that rule of the hand path out and the shaft with some kind of shallow nature to it. So let's look. This was in June, the last time we got together. So you could see how we in time, we got his arms and hands out. And this was a deliberate drill where we continue to try to make this better and better. His arms and hands are much more out in front of him. If you look at where he is at the top versus that position right there, obviously different. It's taken us a lot of time to get him there. And as he comes down, again, this was deliberate because we just keep working on it. But in his full swing, he keeps getting it better and better. So you can see we're kind of at the last 10%, based on everything we've done over the last several years, but you can now see where things are. The hands are higher and more out on the toe line, and the club shaft is pointing well outside the golf ball. And if we bring the club down to P6 or the delivery position, you could see his arms and hands are much more in front of him. The club is out in front of him more. So his swing direction and club path are so much more neutral. His arm and hands are so much more synchronized with the rotation of the body. And if you look at that right there, where his arms are so much more out in front of him, and then if we scroll that through, you can see his exit is more in sync with the body, and look where the club pops out well below that left shoulder versus his old pattern. Very high exit there. So we just kept chipping away at getting his backswing more in front of him and more upright, and then working on the arms and the hands, working more out in that direction and less pull down and trapped. So that's why Billy has been able to take his ball striking to the next level, because of these patterns. So it's another example of how in most cases, not all, but in most cases, that kind of look with the hands out and the shaft shallower creates a much better, a much more consistent ball flight. Here we have Will. The picture on the left is May 14th. The picture on the right is July 26th. Will's 20 years old. His family's been a member at Aronimink his entire life, and he's hardly ever played golf. He told me he did a couple clinics maybe 8-9 years ago. He has not picked up a golf club since, but he's a prime example of several new students this year, kind of from COVID, in the sense that there's not too many other options for people to do. So I've had a lot of 20-year-olds who are in college either not have a summer job or lose a summer internship, or are just out of college and aren't getting a job yet. I've had several people like that take up golf this year, and Will is one of them. He runs cross country and track in college, and he just decided he wanted to get into golf. So let's take a look at what I was dealing with, what showed up on the lesson tee on May 14th. And I have to say, one thing that was good is from the beginning, he was just one of those people that had good hand-eye coordination and had that innate ability to get the club on the golf ball. So that helped from the start, even though these patterns are less than ideal. So we can see his setup, definitely hunched over, the handle's really low. And as he took the club back, the club head's out, but the hands are in a little bit, but particularly the shoulder plane is very steep, and his arms and hands are in, and especially that left arm is really low across his chest with the club shaft very vertical. And if we look at where that club was coming down, it's above the plane, swinging a little bit to the left. So when he gets to this left arm parallel position, again, his left arm's really low. His hands are in a little bit, and let's look at the angle of the club shaft. And when he comes back down, that shaft is still steep. So he has these steep shoulders with his left arm low and across and the shaft vertical, and then he keeps it there coming down. So this limits his ability to have a backswing, to create some speed. It keeps the club shaft, this pattern in the backswing keeps the club shaft vertical coming down. So my strategy right away with Will was to improve his initial posture and setup,
And then our first lesson was to just get him to have a flatter shoulder turn. I didn't even care where the arms went at that point. First things first, right? We can only do so much at once. And so to me, it was to get his setup better and get him to understand his shoulder turn needed to be flatter and try to get the club shaft a little bit flatter in the backswing along with it. That was his extra credit. So now come July 26th on the right, he has probably taken 7 or 8 lessons from me, of which a couple were short game, one was putting, but a lot of it was working on his full swing, including finally getting him to use a driver and actually hit it really well. So you can see now the difference several lessons later. His setup is obviously much, much better, right? I mean, it just looks better. As he goes back, his shoulder turn is much flatter because we had worked on that. And then at some point, maybe the second, third lesson, I started to talk to him about his arm swing. Again, prioritizing the setup and the shoulder turn first. So you can see now how getting the body better allowed the arm swing to get better, and then we could actually specifically work on arm swing. So you can just clearly see the difference in where the hand path goes. There's that checkpoint again that I've talked about. Not that it had to be perfect for Will, but it just happened to end up being really good along with the other patterns he had. And obviously the club shaft is in a different place now. All right, so much different. His shoulder plane is much different. And then we eventually worked on a little bit of arm swing, educating him on allowing the arms to swing longer and up a little bit more. And then as he came back down, you can see how the hand path is working more in front of him, which again is one of those key checkpoints that I look for. And as he comes down, the hands stay out, the club's starting to flatten. He gets down to the forearm, and there's a big difference in the delivery of the club now as a function of changing those patterns. And then what we were able to do, even in this lesson on the right on July 26th, was because the structure of his golf swing had improved so much and his contact was always pretty good, we finally started to work on speed because the structure was solidified. And on this day, this was with a 7-iron, he started at 82 miles an hour on TrackMan and he got up to 90. And we talked about the importance of developing speed because it is an integral part of playing the game. So it's fun to see the progress when we work with students. But the big question is, right, when someone shows up on the lesson tee and we see certain things, how are we going to go about it? So again, that's why I wanted to highlight some of these lessons that I've shared with you, is to just show you a little bit of how I see things, how I think, and how I try to work through this to help people play better.
As I bring the presentation full circle, I think we've learned that there are matchups that work. If we look at swings like Raymond Floyd or Jim Furyk or Miller Barber or Matt Wolff or Adam Scott or Justin Thomas, on the surface, they might look different, but there are checkpoints or common denominators that are very similar in many instances. So I think if we come back to those checkpoints, they're good places for us to monitor in the swing, especially when we're working with our our average students on the lesson tee. Those items like the hand path out in front and the club shaft pointing outside the golf ball and the downswing, the arms in front of the chest, having that swing direction or swing plane be very neutral, having the face square and that lead wrist nice and flat or almost slightly bowed, and having the arms and the club exit on plane synchronized with the body. Those are some key checkpoints that are going to be very helpful. And I think we've learned because of those checkpoints, if the backswing doesn't hurt the downswing, we should let it go. If the backswing negatively affects the downswing, then it's an appropriate time to work on it. So we have to be careful just not to let certain swings fool us on the surface. Let's use the checkpoints. And there are unique situations that could work. Not every good player hits every checkpoint that I've outlined. There are those unique situations, but I think when we're dealing with our average golfer, those checkpoints can be helpful. And so if we look at our Raymond Floyd swing again, as he goes back, that club's behind him, but his hands and arms stay in front of him. And then he comes back down. The hands and arms stay in front. That hand path is very neutral in front of his body. And that club is pointing outside the golf ball. Now, if we look, so that's one way to do it, right? And if we look, this is one of my college players. We're working on standing the club up, keeping the arms more in front of them to create the opportunity for the club to flatten or shallow out. And so now this allows my college player to meet those checkpoints. So there's different ways to get the job done. And I think just as you use some of these checkpoints, if you haven't in the past, the more you use them, the more you'll be able to piece them together and figure out which matchups work. But if we can get to a position more like this, I really believe it provides the opportunity for a better chance for straighter shots, more solid shots, and more club face control for sure. So I hope you felt like you learned a few things. I hope you enjoyed it. And I, again, appreciate the opportunity to share some of my thoughts. And, I wish we had more time. Obviously, an hour isn't long enough to really be able to dig in as much as we want. So, but I definitely looking forward to answering some of your questions and having some further discussion coming up. So thanks so much.
All right, everyone. Thank you so much. I'm going to go ahead and take some questions. I'm excited about this, so please fire away. I guess we're going to use the mute your microphone. Just say your name and ask your question that way, whatever works.
Okay, so we have a question from Josh McCormick. He said, can you speak about some setup keys you look for, as well as some of the differences for a player that is looking to play specific shot shape? Well, I think that to me, the setup keys, standard looking posture, I would say that if we look at a lot of good players, there is a little bit of roundedness at the top of the shoulders, and down at the tailbone, at your pelvis, at your backside. I do like the head to relax down a little bit. Not, I think that old adage of make sure your back is straight and your head is up doesn't really hold true with most good players. So I like a relaxed setup. And obviously not too much curve in the spine. I like the bottom of the spine to go smoothly or flat into your pelvis and your butt. As far as shot shape goes, so obviously I talked a lot about that arm staying in front. So in an ideal world, what we would do to change ball flight, to intentionally change ball flight, if you have your hand path stay in front of you in the downswing and the arms stay in front of you, it's a lot easier to hit a specific shot on cue. So if your hands and arms are more in front of you, your swing direction is going to be more neutral. And if your swing direction is neutral, what you would do to intentionally change ball flight would be what I call three things. I tell this to my good players is obviously number one, visualize the shot you want to hit, but specifically you want to just change your stance alignment and move your ball position around. So hand path and arm swing. If I wanted to hit a draw, I would just drop my right foot back or close the stance down a hair to the right and move the ball back an inch or so. And if I wanted to hit a cut or a fade, I would move the ball an inch or so forward and just open my stance a little bit. And that's one of, I believe, the big benefits of having neutral patterns, which match up with the checkpoints that I discussed today, is that for good players, it gives you the opportunity to curve a shot on cue just by making those two adjustments in your setup. Okay, so here's a good question. The 20-year-old college player that I started working with, how much of the flattening of his shoulder plane was directly related to changing his posture, and how much of it was a conscious effort on his part? Obviously I wasn't measuring him, on K motion or 3D system. But I would say that probably more of it was a conscious effort to flatten his shoulders. Obviously, there was some correlation to the posture, but I would say probably more than 50% of it was him consciously working. From Kenny Leach here, besides video analysis, what goes into your evaluation process of each new player you see on the lesson tee? Well, obviously, I've got to get to know the player, ask them about injuries that they might have, what their historical patterns were with their swing, with their ball flight. Absolutely going to watch the ball flight, everything from direction to trajectory to contact. Have TrackMan running for sure, especially with better players. I don't use TrackMan in every lesson all the time. It depends, but TrackMan would certainly be part of that initial evaluation as well. At Aronimic, I don't have a learning center here, so I don't have a gasp or a swing catalyst to use right now. But if I did, I would certainly use something like that as well. All right, so here's a question from Steve Hanlon, an awesome teacher in Vero Beach. Steve asks, when teaching new players, do you personally have a preference to work body or club or is it more player dependent? For me, Steve, I would be very much arms, hands, club, and then contact. It depends. But probably early on, I just have a preference of doing a lot of smaller swings and making sure their grip and their setup is good, having them feel the arms, swing the club head, and hit the golf ball. But there's right. I mean, as I say, one of my lines is it always depends, right? Everything depends on certain factors, but I definitely would tend to work, more arms and hands and club. Josh McCormick asked, how would you approach a senior golfer looking for more distance? Um, Probably the few common things that I see are players not turning as much in the backswing. Their pivot isn't dynamic as much. They don't turn their hips or their pelvis as much. They don't turn the torso as much. And I also think that there's still that old adage of golfers think they need to swing smooth or swing slow. So I would also start with just the concept of them having the freedom to try to swing faster. Obviously that, when we're talking about a senior golfer, it would depend on what their range of motion is, what kind of physical strength they have, if they've had injuries throughout their life. But that's how I usually start with the pivot, both in the hips and the torso and the chest and the shoulders, the length of the arms. I have a member at Old Marsh. We've worked a lot on turning the rib cage and the torso, but also just using the wrists to create some leverage. What are some of the most popular programs that we run at our club? Well, I would say our junior program is very popular here, very vibrant at Aronimink, very vibrant. So we offer afternoon clinics. We have our big summer program. We have ladies programs that we offer that I've been involved in the past. We also have a new female teaching pro, Abby Mann, who's been a rock star here at Aronimink, and she's run a bunch of programs for ladies. And our participation level has been extremely high. So specifically, I think we've done a nice job of being creative with our junior program, particularly, using props and games and cones and hula hoops and all sorts of things to make our junior program a lot of fun. Okay, so Steve Hanlon from Johns Island is asking, what other TrackMan numbers do I like to use when teaching better players? So for me, probably one of the most important numbers is swing direction. And I know a lot of people talk about club path. Ultimately, club path is very crucial. But to me, the swing direction in creating or affecting the club path number, the attack angle number. So swing direction is really important to me because it ends up affecting a lot of different numbers. The other thing I like to do is I like to look at obviously the attack angle with different clubs, but also how the attack angle can affect ball speed. If you use the optimizer, actually, it's one of the reasons why I like shallower patterns in the golf swing, not only a shallower club shaft in the downswing, but a shallower attack position. If the club is coming into the ball with a shallower attack angle, the ball speed goes up. Anytime we have a glancing strike on the golf ball, whether it's in to out or out to in, or hitting too much up or at some point hitting too much down, it's a glancing strike between the club and the golf ball. So attack angle is something I look a lot at. Obviously, ball speed, smash factor. But to me, the big ones would be swing direction, swing plane, and attack angle, because those effectively are creating the club path number. Okay, another question from Josh McCormick. Can I list some of my favorite training aids or teaching aids? I would say for me, a lot of those actually would fall under putting, because I teach a lot of putting as well. And I think that, some training aids for putting are good, like the Perfect Putter. I'm a big aim point believer. I use a digital level. I like the Dave Pell's O balls, the striped balls. I'll use some mirrors. I like Ted Sheftick's spine board. I like Ted Sheftick's impact ramp board to help people have a concept of how to hit down on the golf ball. I like sometimes using a towel for golfers that get their arms disconnected from the golf ball, from their body. I will say I'm not a big training aid guy. My belief is, right or wrong, my belief is if I can get a golfer to make changes without a training aid, that's the first way I go. And then if they need more of a specific feel or more guidance, then I will use some training aids. I'm a big fan, honestly, of just using some noodles, sticking them in the ground, using alignment rods on the ground for aim, and keeping an eye on where players swing their arms and the club. Kenny Leach asked that I mentioned working technical aspects and then adding the speed after. Do you feel the same principle applies to juniors? I would say not necessarily. I think that in a lot of instances, I think it's a good thing to just teach kids how to get their arms and their body moving and create speed. So depending on, I think the word junior golfer is broad in the sense of, you're right, that could cover a 5-year-old, or it might cover a high school player, depending on our definition of juniors. To have that mentality to be able to swing away and have fun and try to swing faster, and then add some structure to their swing as they get bigger and stronger, and they can actually, manage the club where the club doesn't manage them. Mark Derlin. Hey, Mark. Mark is asking where I set up my camera. I would say that it depends what I'm looking at, Mark. I move the camera around. I feel like that if I'm looking specifically at plane or on the hands or the elbow, if I'm looking at, so I would be anywhere from 5, 6, 7, 10 paces back. So I'll use the elbow plane or the hand plane a lot, but sometimes I'll go on the target line as well. I'll sometimes bring the camera up to make sure I have a good view of what the backswing looks like. So I will move it around. If I'm zooming in on someone's wrist angles at the top of the backswing and in transition, then I'll raise the camera up and zoom in. So I like to move it around. I think that knowing what we know now, is, you know, I think years ago there was an argument of where you should have the camera. I would say, you know, try to be consistent with it, but I think knowing what we know with swing direction and swing plane on TrackMan, it depends what you're looking for. Marcus Schnellenberger, what are your most used or go-to drills? Yeah, you know, that's something I definitely, you know, if we had done this in person, I would have shown you some of those. Obviously, it's hard to convey that over Zoom. But I'll do, if I'm working backswing, I'll do specific drills where I think with Sharon, I had that yellow stick on the ground on her toe line as a visual for arms and hands to go straighter back. I mean, I'll do all sorts of drills. So I have one in the backswing where I have players swing along the toe line with the club. They'll swing back to checkpoint one where the club's parallel to the ground, and then they keep turning and swinging. And they checkpoint two is left, where it's adding some precision to the backswing. But I like putting a club or a stick across the shoulders, putting a stick just inside your right heel on the ground, and turning and matching the club on your shoulders to the club on the ground. I got that one from Jim McLean years ago. So I do a lot with the turn, with the backswing pivot with a stick on the ground, so golfers can see either where that left shoulder goes, where the lead shoulder goes relative to the golf ball, or where the trail shoulder goes relative, you know, to where they are in the backswing. So, yeah, like I said, I mean, if we had done this in person, I could have shown you. It's hard to convey all of those via Zoom, but that's a good question. Drills are important. I do a lot of half swing drills, a lot of stop and go drills, so golfers can have that time to actually think about it. As I say, if you don't slow things down sometimes and your brain doesn't have time to think it, there's no way you can send that message to your body to actually, you know, change a motor pattern. So I do a lot of stop and goes. Jimmy Carlucci, while teaching, do you have specific drills for leg movement during the swing, or do you believe the legs will move as a result of the swing changes made elsewhere, especially for beginner golfers where you see a lot of awkward movement below the waist? Jimmy, that is an awesome question. I would say that could be a combination of, you know, if a golfer has good patterns, the leg action can follow. And sometimes if they have funky motion with their knees and their legs, you know, sometimes you have to get in there and put a stick in there, or put a large range basket between their legs, or get in there and hold their leg to help give them a feel. So I think that that's a combination for sure. I would say that I would try to start more with arms, hands, club, and ball contact. If their leg action isn't perfect, I might let that go. That would be one of the items I might not focus on immediately. Of course, it depends on the person. All right. If any other questions, don't be shy about any of the swings that we looked at, or any other general questions. I do see a question from Charles Lestraco asking if I've used the Rapsodo launch monitor, and I have not used that. Well, thank you everyone so much. It was a pleasure to be with you, and hopefully you felt like you learned a few things. And also, I would just throw this out there that please don't hesitate to reach out to me. I really enjoy sharing my thoughts. I certainly don't know everything, and I don't pretend to. Every day is a learning day out on the lesson tee. But if you have any questions, please let me know. My email address is jhbierkan@hotmail.com. So my email is jhbierkan@hotmail.com. Please feel free to shoot me an email if you have any questions, or when I get back to Florida in November, if you want to come hang out and talk shop at Old Marsh, I'd be happy to have you. So thank you all so much.
Hey coach, how does this sound? Less range time, more income, better results. We all know instruction needs to be reframed. There's merit to the one-on-one lesson and value to tweaking a player's swing, but we also know that an hour of a trained eye coupled with some well-intended suggestions won't fix a player's game. If you really think about improvement, most people are quick to realize that this isn't the way to get better. To have any chance to improve at golf or any other physical endeavor, a player must be willing to participate in a real program. We call this process training. Process training is a cycle of testing, teaching, and training that leads to a programmed progression. First, you benchmark current skill levels. Next, you teach the elements required to improve. Third, the player practices and trains new physical and mental patterns. Finally, the original test can be taken to identify progress. At Iconic, we say there's power in your process. That power goes beyond process training. It's also the power to educate, the power of flexibility, and the power to earn. We're here to help you deliver it. So, how can Iconic help me achieve this? We built Iconic with the concepts of process training front and center, giving any coach the power to deliver personalized and effective programs for their students. For example, we know it can be frustrating for both coach and student when practice is strictly allocated to time in lesson. With a clear list of activities to do outside of the in-person session, students get actionable steps they can refer back to, and coaches can follow along with their progress. We call these packages of steps modules. Our app is preloaded with over 300 lesson modules that serve as the building blocks to creating impactful plans for students. Testing modules give coaches the tools to benchmark where a student stands with a particular element of the game. Lesson modules are packed with specific content dedicated to the subject at hand. A video kicks things off and serves as an explainer piece. Next, we add key points to accentuate the presentation with mental cues to reference again and again. Finally, we have structured practice sessions that can be done anywhere from the couch to the course, all intended to train movement patterns and improve a student's state of play. Testing modules are used again to give coaches the tools to see progress over the lifespan of a program. Put together, our library gives coaches the tools today to build out considered training programs for their students tomorrow. Don't like the presentation of content in the modules? We realize that there are many coaches that will want to build out their own video and content library, and we've made this process as easy as can be. A coach can easily go into any of the Iconic modules, swap out their videos for ours, and edit the text, key points, and practice sessions to better match how they teach. We believe this allows our coaches to create custom content at their own pace and still have access to a complete Iconic textbook. Iconic allows for all forms of communication, sending images and videos, making calls, and live video through a proprietary app function that we call Smart Chat. All comms are relative to the modules being assigned, giving you context to questions being asked, or the ability to leave feedback on student progress appropriately. Less range time, more income, better results. These aren't empty statements. We've talked to hundreds of coaches over the years, and these are the three things we hear time and time again. We believe Iconic can get you there, and we want to help you make the changes you need to do so. The first and often overlooked first step to achieving this goal is change. With Iconic, you don't start with the lesson. You start with digital delivery, the simple act of sending your student modules through the app. That seems pretty basic, right? Let us tell you why it's crucial to the health and growth of your business, and we can relate it to our 3 goals. 1. Less time on the range. Delivering lesson modules digitally through the app does the obvious for you. It gives your student the instruction materials and practice sessions up front. Now they can have a permanent record of what you sent to them, and they can view, review, and practice the materials at any time and any place they want. This not only helps you as the coach, but it's also a much more effective way for your students to retain the important information. 2. More income. Removing the in-person layer allows you to build out fully remote programs in a fraction of the time it takes you to deliver a day of in-person lessons. By combining a mix of remote, blended, and in-person programs for your students, you can scale your business without the restrictions of time and geography. 3. Better results. The evolution of coaching golf is a never-ending journey. We've designed Iconic around the concept of truly training and developing golfers. We know you all know what to do, but maybe it's been difficult to put everything together in a disjointed and analog world. Iconic just makes it easier for you to be great at what you do. The base level of Iconic is a free license to the coach and a $20 per month subscription for each student. We have wholesale options that allow you to buy the subscriptions at a lower cost. This is the first opportunity for you to create a new revenue stream and start earning income from student subscriptions. To offset the need for you to be creating value from the jump, the base subscription will deliver a module to your students once per week in the form of mini digital programming. These programs will be automatically delivered to all of your students at the same time each week. It's a great value, and it requires nothing more than a simple opt-in from you. We also want to be a resource to help you become more familiar with process training. We've created a great starting point for any coach to begin crafting structured programs. Using our templates can get you started delivering real process training programs with ease. Less range time, more income, and better results are all right at your fingertips. Reach out to us for more information on getting started with Iconic. There's power in your process. We're just here to help you deliver it.